when we found out that Jacob Blake is experiencing paralysis. Or maybe since Wednesday, when the media found out that Jacob is handcuffed to his hospital bed, adding symbolism to imagery. If you were like me, then this week you have been noticing your steps a little bit more. Noticing the way that your legs rhythmically rise and fall, the ease of their motion. If you are like me, then you have been wondering what it would be like to wake up one morning without this motion, this rhythm, this ease. And in our text for today, the story centers around a man who has woken up to just that. Another day without the ability to walk. And though we don't know the reason for his paralysis, it could have been a lifelong illness, or it could have been the result of a life-altering event like Jacob Blake. We are told that his situation is so severe that he is lying on a horizontal mat, and that he is not seated on it, but lying. Now, in Mark and Luke's versions of this story, the man is brought through the roof of the house to Jesus' feet. A detail that Matthew curiously leaves out of the story. And though this may seem like a negligible detail, it's not. It's shockingly symbolic and theologically profound. In Mark and Luke's account, the friends go up on the roof of the place to eventually lower their friend down to Jesus. Now, roofs at the time were typically flat, and houses often had stairways that would lead to the roof. Galileans built their roofs by first placing scaffolding and then layers of branches, and after that, hardened mud. So digging your way through it wouldn't be impossible, and seems to be what both Mark and Luke suggest. And scholars have been digging into and questioning the reasons behind going through the roof. Though Mark and Luke both explicitly say it was because there was no room to enter through the normal doors, scholars have really questioned the other customs and norms of the time. What are the other meanings behind coming through the roof? Just like entering a place, entering a house in 2020 through the front door has a different meaning than entering casually through the back door, or, God forbid, getting on your hands and knees and crawling through the dog door. Entering the roof of a place in antiquity carries a different nuance, a different meaning, a different symbolism. Now, one custom in antiquity was to ensure that if a miracle occurred in a place, then the exit of that person was different than their entrance, symbolically showing that transformation had just happened. So this line of reasoning goes to say, the man's exit through the door juxtaposes his entrance through the roof to represent the healing that just unfolded. Another social custom was that the coming and going through the roof was thought to be a place of demons, disease, and death. Oftentimes in the Greco-Roman world, when somebody died in a place, they would carry the corpse, the body, in an unusual way out of the space, oftentimes through the roof. And another custom that originates back to India and antiquity is the expulsion of demons through the roof, since demons were thought to be the reason behind illness. Now, with all of those ancient customs and more that surely evade us now, entering a place through the roof carried a certain stigma, a stigma of dirtiness and disease. And knowing this about his onlookers, knowing that the crowd around him had been so conditioned to see entering a place through the roof as a place of dirtiness, disease, and death, Jesus knew what they were thinking. He knew that they would sneer at this man being lowered, not just for one, but for two reasons: his disease and his entrance. And knowing these customs as well, the readers of these Gospels, of Mark and Luke, would pick up on the layers of symbolism from the man entering from the roof. But Mark and Luke both share that the friends did this because there was no other option. Central to all of these norms and customs that swirl around is explicitly the fact that the crowds were spilling out of the place and there was no other way to get in besides the roof. Jesus, at this point in time, had grown quite a reputation and quite the popularity. He had already done miracles. He had already healed the multitudes. He had already calmed the storm and fed the thousands. And so people flocked wherever he was. So much so that in the text immediately before this one, people are so afraid of the power that Jesus clearly has that they beg him to leave their city. And so he does. At the beginning of the story for today, we are told that Jesus left that city and came back home. So this story is set in Capernaum, Jesus' own hometown. And here he draws yet another massive crowd. And shoulder to shoulder they probably were. I imagine them leaning in and enraptured to what Jesus was teaching. And seeing these people spill out of the entrances, blocking all of the ways to get in. The men carrying their friend had no other option but to go through the roof. Now, I like to imagine what the friends were thinking during their journey on the climb up the roof and lowering their friend down to Jesus. I wonder, did they make a plan to get to Jesus at a specific time to try and get away from all of the crowds? Were they dismayed? Were they heartbroken when they saw the people spilling out of the place? Did they already have a plan to go through the roof if the crowds were in fact there, or was this a spontaneous decision? And did any of them think on their journey, on the climb up the roof, or on the laborious lowering down, is this really worth it? Isn't this asking for too much? A thought that I myself had not too long ago. This week I was driving through a parking lot and passed a woman with a sign that explained her dire situation and asked for help. I wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. I pulled over my car, I masked up, and I walked over to the woman. She said she needed money, so I, not having cash on me, ran into the grocery store next to us, grabbed a Visa gift card, and came out and handed it to her. I asked her if there was anything else that I could do to help, any other need that she had. And she did. She said she needed help finding a place to stay that night. She said she didn't want to intrude on a person's home, she didn't want to stay in a guest room, but just needed help finding a hotel. And then the thought came. The thought that I now wonder if any of those mat-carrying men have as well. Isn't this asking for too much? Handing her the card, I told her that it would probably cover the cost of the hotel room. I got in my car and I left. And it could have been enough, but I wouldn't know because I left her. It could have been enough, but I heard the thought, isn't this asking for too much? And I obeyed. It could have been enough, but I inched up to my own line in the sand of comfort, and I turned around and I left her. Now, I like to imagine that one of the mat carriers had this and maybe other thoughts. Maybe one of the mat carriers wasn't in as good a shape as the others, and his back was aching and his hands were cramping. Maybe he, too, felt the tugging of self-righteousness on his journey. Maybe he, too, thought to himself, isn't this asking too much of me? Maybe he was coming to his own line in the sand and just wanted to throw up his hands and say, all right, well, we tried. We can try again another day. I like to imagine that hearing this internal chatter, he looked from his slipping hands to those of his friends. looking up at their faces and seeing their eyes fixed on the house where Jesus was, and their gait steady. And he took another step. Because sometimes it is precisely the faith of those around us that arises faith within us. Sometimes it is precisely the faith of others next to us that carries us forward. And that's exactly what Jesus is about to say to them. Jesus, now back in his hometown, hears the scratching of branches removed from the roof while he's probably in the middle of an amazing lesson. Jesus, most likely in either his own home or Peter's home, squints as light breaks through the room, through a growing hole in the roof. Jesus, realizing that either Peter's or his own property is being actively destroyed in front of his very eyes, watches as his friends probably fumble and tumble their way to the ground as they try to gently lower their friend on his mat. And after all of this collective fumbling and tumbling, digging, scratching, aching, and cramping, the text simply says, when Jesus saw their faith. And with another Miracle Friends story, with another story of miracle, comes another definition of faith. Faith, in this story, is the powerful hope that something can be different. Faith, as identified by the narrator's perception of what Jesus is thinking, is carrying the load and carrying one another. Faith is the exhausting work that probably left these friends bent over, chests heaving, faces grimaced, waiting for the words that Jesus is about to say. Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven. And though this declaration of Jesus may come as a surprise to us modern readers, and though the simple phrase has given way to a faulty theology that disease is connected to punishment for sin, the author of Matthew connects the faith of the friends and the healing of the man. In this story, the vicarious faith of the friends provides Jesus with a crack in the door to perform a miracle. The text says nothing about the faith of the man experiencing paralysis. Perhaps he had run out of faith. Perhaps he couldn't imagine anything getting better. Didn't think the trip to Jesus would be worth it. Maybe he just couldn't open himself up to hope again, just to be disappointed. Whatever his reason may be, the reader is told only that Jesus notes the action of the mat carriers as faith, and that their faith is sufficient for him. The faith of others, it seems, friends, can save us when we can't imagine anything getting better. The faith of others can heal us when we can't bear to bring ourselves to Jesus. The faith of others can carry us when we can't bear to open ourselves up to hope out of fear of being disappointed again. And there are moments when all of us need carrying, when we lose hope and need to be carried to Christ. And there are moments when all of us are the carriers, when we see a need that is so great and we bear the load to bring it to the feet of Christ. And there are moments when all of us grow exhausted from the journey, when we look down at our hands that are slipping in the long road ahead, and we think to ourselves, isn't this asking for too much? But we don't experience them equally because of the systems and the structures that swirl around us. Some bodies are more frequently doing the carrying, while other bodies are more frequently paralyzed and enchained. herein lies the prime task of the church. We will carry faith for the world. If we are to take the task of this passage seriously, respond to the call that is crying out loud from the words on this page, then we are to carry faith for those who can't. We are to do the work of fumbling and tumbling, digging and scratching, aching and cramping for those who can't yet imagine anything getting better. We are to carry the load, believing in God and believing in one another. Believing that God is good and can heal, while believing that the world and people are good and worthy of being healed. I've gone back and driven to and through that parking lot twice since I left that woman trying to make things right. And I pray that somebody else did what I didn't do that day. I pray that someone else drove up, got out of the car, heard her need, made a few calls, a few transactions, and maybe even gave her a ride. I pray that an ordinary, mat-carrying hero carried that woman farther than your pastor did that day. Because maybe with a world full of mat-carrying heroes and the healing power of Christ, we will wake up in a world one day where nobody is paralyzed and in jail. Amen.